member retailers and related companies in New England and New York. Essentially, the gas fireplace industry, heating gas fireplaces, our products are used as large zone heaters, much like wood heaters that they often replace. Our products are used in the evening when everyone's home and when winter electricity use can be peaking. The vast majority of our members include our distributors, and including our members and distributors and manufacturers are mom and pop small businesses. Because the Northeast HPBA so completely understands and recognizes the changing landscape of energy and fossil fuel industry, we invited you today so we can all better understand the roadmap and be part of the solution. We want to let you know that we're committed to working with the government officials and the regulators at all levels to increase access to more sustainable and climate-centric fuel sources for homes and businesses, to include natural gas, propane, solid fuel, electricity, and existing and emerging renewable technology. This is why we're so happy you joined us today. We're very excited to hear from this administration about the roadmap for 2050, not just with natural gas, but also in terms of small businesses and our role. So just really quickly, I just want to introduce two members of Northeast HPBA, just so you can get kind of an idea of who and what we are. Dave Bancroft is number one. I'd like to introduce Dave.
Hey, I'm Dave Bancroft. I'm the president of the Massachusetts Chimney Sweep Guild. I really appreciate you taking the time, Mr. Ismay, to listen to us here. I own a small business here in North Reading, Massachusetts called Sweep and Man Chimney Restoration. And I have approximately 20 employees, and we're growing like crazy, and I'm looking to hire probably 8 to 12 more people by the end of this season. That represents 20 Massachusetts families. And as president of the Massachusetts Guild, I represent approximately 400 chimney sweep companies from across the Commonwealth, and anywhere from 1 to 20 employees each. So this equates to hundreds of Massachusetts families all across the Commonwealth. Our industry specializes in improving efficiency of home heating systems through proper venting techniques. Wood, gas, and oil burning appliances. We install a lot of stainless chimney liners and polypropylene chimney liners, and it all improves efficiency of these systems, which obviously equates to less carbon emissions. I love this state, and I love this country, and I love this planet. And so I'd really like to know if there's anything that we can do as an industry to help, reduce carbon emissions. However, I am just totally against banning fossil fuels from buildings, fossil fuels and wood burning appliances. I think with greater efficiencies, we can make improvements, but I just don't agree that a total ban of fossil fuels and wood burning is necessary. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. The other person I'd like to introduce really quickly from our membership is Sean Rosser. I see him here. He's muted at the moment.
Unmute. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Ismay, for hosting us here. My family got into this industry in 2006 when we bought a small business with 5 employees in 1 location. We currently have 4 locations, 3 in Massachusetts, 1 in Rhode Island, about 45 employees. And in fact, at last year's summer company party, we had almost 100 adults and kids. This year, we're not going to have one, unfortunately. I am very concerned, as are most of our employees, about the environment and climate change. I have 2 grandchildren myself, and obviously I want to leave the best possible planet for them that I can. But I think it's critical, as Dave was talking about, that the lawmakers understand the role that the hearth plays for the residential homeowner. It's not only aesthetic, although that is a key factor. I mean, fire has been a key piece of humankind's, ethos for millions of years, and people really gravitate and they want that real fire aesthetic. And frankly, electric just hasn't gotten there, not yet, and it's not clear that it ever will. The other factor that Dave touched on is alternative and backup energy. Almost every customer that comes in looking for a hearth product asks, what if I lose power? Because it does happen. And they want an alternative source of heat to be able to provide them the safety of that. So, I hope that you folks are thoughtful and, as Dave said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater as you craft the strategy forward. And I look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you. I'm all set.
Great, David. I think that those were our introductory remarks, and look forward to. I know you said you thought you had about 10 or 15 minutes or so of presentation, and then I think Karen and others may have a couple of questions based on that.
Sure. And Ben, are you the host? It's saying that I can't screen share, that the host has it disabled, but if you can double check.
I am host.
I only have 2 slides, so it's not critical. We can talk about it.
Going to try to fix that. There we go.
Okay. Okay, I'm in. Great. Is that can folks see that? Just the title slide? Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, I only have 2 slides today, just focused on our initial findings around gas and building heat. And I appreciate, Dave and Sean, your comments in particular, that we're looking for solutions to this issue that work for everybody, and that recognize the values that people share right now. Definitely focused on what is least cost for the most folks, and also doing it as much as possible with an all of the above approach. So we aren't approaching this as banning anything or 100% this or 100% that. As in fact, we're running more than a half a dozen scenarios out to 2050, and we did a few of them that were sort of 100%, either getting rid of all fossil fuels or 100% renewable fuels. And as might not be a surprise to folks, those end up being some of the most expensive. So it's more a strategy of replacing and encouraging folks when they make capital decisions to, and there's several for various things. For light bulbs, they get replaced every couple of years, so we can go through a number of life cycles of different technology there. At the other end, large commercial power plants for electricity are built for 40-year lifespans, and we're already 30 years away from the goal. So each one of those now is, if we build something new, we want to make sure it's part of our 2050 portfolio, so that we're not spending the money now and then losing it in 20 years or 15 years before it's capital replacement. So that's generally our approach, which I think is consistent with some of what I heard from you guys. And I can talk more about other parts of our analysis, but there are 2 main things that I wanted to share that are driving our findings around gas for building heat. So again, this isn't the whole picture. This is, and I should know the number right off the top of my head, and I don't, but say, more than 50%, maybe it's 60% of folks in Massachusetts use pipeline gas or utility delivered gas to heat their homes. So that becomes a big piece of the puzzle, is what are those homes heated with, and what's the future of that system? But that is not the entire system, as you all well know. There are folks heating with propane, There are folks heating with wood. There's actually, apparently, according to the records, there's folks still using coal or coke in very small amounts, which was, I only say it was a surprise to me because I guess I'm sort of I guess I've had gas service most places I've lived. So, you know, there is a mix. Let's see if I can advance my own slide here. There we go. So this is one thing that we're finding in the model about gas in bulk, really talking about the utility gas system, which, as I'm sure you all know, was really built to deliver gas for building services, mostly to residential consumers. So yes, to commercial and industrial. We certainly burn a lot of it to make electricity right now. 50% of our electricity regionally is from gas-fired power plants that are interconnected into the wholesale gas system. But most of that infrastructure was built, like most of our electrical infrastructure, essentially by ratepayers, customers, people. You know, that large number of bills that spread these capital costs that can be, you know, $1 billion for a new 36-inch regional pipeline over a lot of time and a lot of people. So looking at that system, one of the interesting things that this analysis has done for the first time really is push all the way out. So a lot of analyses start today and they sort of try and turn the dial down or tweak today and see how far that gets you towards the goal. We took a different approach, which has been used nationally and internationally, which is to go all the way forward to 2050. And you sort of advance your number of square feet of residential space, the heating demand in therms to heat that. Same thing with commercial and industrial, and all that stuff is up for grabs, but we use national, federal, DOE projections for those kind of things. But go all the way up to 2050, see what it takes to make the system work under that tight emissions cap, which is really, really low by 2050, and then sort of connect the dots back to today. The reason I went into all that is in a 2050 world where the emissions limits are low everywhere, what we're finding is that gas can still burn in small quantities without carbon capture and sequestration, and alternatives are also available. Hydrogen, biomass, you know, fuels that are produced using biomass, which exist today. 10% of our gasoline today is ethanol in most of the state, from our friends in the Midwest, I guess, corn, ethanol. So it's already here, it's already real. But at that very low level in 2050, essentially the modeling is strongly suggesting that those fuels are going to be relatively scarce, relatively expensive because of their scarcity, and they're really going to be needed elsewhere in the economy, which is why this slide starts here. This is a slide that I used to talk to the governor recently. And so maybe the easiest way to think about it is like a 747. Really hard to put electric propellers on that sucker. Also hard to put carbon capture and sequestration on the back end of its tailpipes. If we want to keep flying, it's likely that, yes, we'll see improvements in the airframes and in the engine efficiencies, but maybe it's 50%, and that we're still going to be burning something in those turbines to fly the aircraft. You know, that's one of the places where folks think that these scarce combustible, I call them low carbon combustibles, whether it's gas, biogas, hydrogen blended into methane, hydrogen blended in with biogas, you know, there's all sorts of very real options. But those are all limited in volume. And then they all have what I've described here, at least in the heating realm, as this triple cost penalty. And that's not a judgment. That's sort of how the model, which is trying to build this system at least cost for the most consumers, is there's some cost to synthesize those fuels, whereas right now there's very low cost, almost no cost to get methane out of the ground. There is a cost, but it's, you know, at a all-time low with what we found in Pennsylvania and other places close to us for the first time. But these fuels all need to be manufactured either through biomass or hydrogen, different techniques, but they all have a cost there. Then they generally have to have some sort of transportation cost. So that's either the current gas system, which is largely paid for now, but would have to continue to be paid for, or something of a new transport system for hydrogen. And then they're being burned in what are actually very efficient furnaces, but they're not that efficient compared to the electric alternatives, the heat pumps, which have made remarkable gains even in the last 5 years. The current heat pump technology that's being installed all across Maine, which arguably has colder winters than most of us here in Massachusetts do, are rated down to -15 degrees. I heard the concern about alternate fuels, and that's a very real option. There's no reason to necessarily ban a backup source. This is really a game of volume and time. And so if X number of customers have backup propane or backup gas to their, say, heat pump system that turns on a few days a year, every other year when we have a cold winter, or maybe it's just a few days a year, a week, a couple weeks during the year, the system sort of isn't that tight. Like, that's okay. I mean, that it isn't going to be something that needs an outright like house-to-house ban or something that draconian or top-down. So there's room for all that. It's really a question of what are all those, that large majority of people that are currently served by the gas system likely to do based on cost. And as we would see that price of gas going up, either because the emissions are capped and it's subject to some sort of carbon tax or cap and trade system or something, or blending requirement, that as that cost went up, the relative high efficiency of the heat pump and this double end use benefit, that when you get to replacing that box, that expensive box, none of us as homeowners want to go through that cost. I just put a roof on our house, and I didn't think I had $9,000 laying around, but I found it, unfortunately. Fortunately, I found it, but it's one of those just homeowner costs that when they have to happen for most people, and they find a way to do it. That when those decisions are being made, increasingly a heat pump, which can also deliver air conditioning, and do it cheaper in the long run, cheaper to operate, and using a cheaper fuel, certainly out 10 or 15 years from now. But that's really the driver here for the market. So that's what we're seeing. It's not a preference for or against. It's under the emissions cap. Burning gas in buildings is one of our largest sources of emissions, after burning gasoline in light duty vehicles. So those are the emissions that have to get shifted away. And it looks right now like the lowest cost way to do that for the most people would be shifting to some sort of heat pump. One of the things that implies, I guess, which is difficult. We're starting to see the dynamic, but we don't have solutions yet. So we're working on policy options now. Is what does that imply for the current gas system, which is the costs of which are spread among whatever that is, 60% of us across the state, obviously mainly in urban areas. And if more and more of those people are finding it cost effective to shift to heat pumps, that puts fewer and fewer people maintaining the cost of the system. And I think, again, I have to check, but I believe the sort of undepreciated capital investment by our utilities in our pipes in the ground is on the order of $6 billion. So normally that's private money that gets invested by the utility in the distribution system, and then they recover it through our rates over a long term. So it's like a financial banking relationship, if you will. So that's a high value, and that will all have to be worked out. as that shift happens, if it happens this way. Again, there are other ways to do it. A number of the utilities are very interested in the low carbon combustibles, the biomass, renewable natural gas, or hydrogen. And those are real. We expect and see a need for those to happen, to blend down the gas we're using between now and 2050. And then what we're seeing in the modeling is that more and more that gas is not being used for retail heat. It's being used sparingly in commercial and industrial applications, which can essentially absorb the cost of a much higher cost fuel and or of offsetting the emissions. So it could very well be that the John Hancock Tower, I know nothing about it except that it's tall and in Boston, but something like that may have, a revenue situation where it makes sense for it not to retrofit the building, but to continue to pay, to continue to heat with gas, sort of even if the cost of gas triples or quadruples. So it's not it's a difficult problem. In certain places it's a building by building problem. This slide is really talking to sort of the average home that's heated by gas now, and the cost comparison of in the future being on an electric heat source. So this is a slide again that I spoke to the governor about. This is some draft results, and you can see, I hope you can see our menu down there, the legend. It's got gas, distillate kerosene, liquid propane, fossil boilers, radiators, geothermal heat pump, electric resistance, solar, cordwood, air source heat pumps. I believe it has more sources than that. It's one of the most complete models for this kind of work out there. But so it's not, we're taking all that into account. What we're seeing here, this all options case, is showing maybe is that about 85% of residential heat transitioning to an air source heat pump as the likely least cost option. This is equipment sales over, so by 2035, it's about, so I should have said, sorry, this is sales. So this is a game sort of turning over stock from things that have tailpipes, essentially, like, cars are an easy example, each year putting more and more EVs on the road, so that by 2050, virtually all the virtually all the cars are zero emission. So you don't have to switch a light switch, you just have to start transitioning your sales profile as the stock turnover comes over. So I should have explained this better. This is showing about 85% of heater sales by 2035 being air source heat pump. There's cordwood stoves in there still, geothermal heat pumps, some electric resistance. In this option, or in this version of the future, gas sales are ending about 2038, maybe 2040. Again, there's a companion to this which shows the stock, and it's a much gentler curve that as the sales transition, you start to, there's a lag behind it where you see the stock turnover, so that each year there's a greater percentage of those new units. Same thing with electric cars or zero emission cars. So I apologize. I often show the two, the sales and the stock. This one was just showing sales. You can see this is a case we ran where we assumed that the pipeline was filled with essentially a new product instead of methane from Louisiana and Pennsylvania. It was some very, very high blend, 60%, 50% of methane plus a biogas or hydrogen to drive the emissions factor per unit burned down. And so you see maintaining sales of gas heating, but it's declining maybe to 20% max in 2050. And this the slide I showed before was really to talk to the governor and others, you as well, about why we, even in this situation with pipeline gas being available and decarbonized to an extent sort of not ever done before, but possible, we would still expect to see a large increase in air source heat pumps. So that's what this note here is, keeping as many sources open for as long as possible. So as many sources of heat remain on the table for as long as possible, gives us a lot of flexibility across locations and building types. We have, I don't know how many types, 70, 100, 200 sort of building types across Massachusetts, with a lot of our stock is pre-1980, before there were mandatory energy codes. So we want to maintain that flexibility for people to figure out what's best for them while still meeting the overall emissions profile. But so sort of across all our scenarios, even with a decarbonized pipeline product, we're still seeing this very high level of electric heat, basically of heat pumps. This model picked air source heat pumps. It is not discriminating against ground source heat pumps or other kinds. It's just right now on the current cost profiles for most residences, an air source heat pump can now do the job, and it's just a cheaper box than putting a box and drilling the field, drilling the pipes down into your property somewhere. And a similar profile in commercial, but this is showing a higher amount of electric resistance heating, and that is really I believe what the reason it's a large wedge is because it's reflecting the use of electric boilers. So for some large commercial facilities and industrial processes, there are already boiler systems that are dual fuel. You can run electric and you can run gas. And what we're seeing is, in a future where we have sort of tons and tons of offshore wind, when the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, those days it's cheapest for everybody to be just soaking up as much electricity as possible. And so we'd expect all those dual fuel commercial boiler systems and district heating systems to be heating with electricity. And then on other days, they very well may choose to use that wholesale blended gas product. Again, not suggesting that it'll be taken off the market or those pipelines will be shuttered and never used again, but more likely being used by large C&I customers. And that is all I have. It's a lot, and I will stop here for questions, and I can keep this slide up, or maybe it's better to I can stop this and go back to the slides if we want.
Well, thank you, Undersecretary. I know that prior and in preparation for your presentation, Karen had received some questions from the membership, and maybe some of them, even in addition, based on some of your comments. And so I will pass it back to her to be able to get that part started.
Thank you, I appreciate it. One of the first questions I have, which I guess is actually fairly pertinent considering what your talk. There's a lot of town by town gas bans on the agenda throughout Massachusetts. Building code, Board of Building Regulations and Standards, gas bans come up constantly to be an overall building code for the state of Massachusetts, but you here stated that you weren't just for gas bans. So I'm wondering if the administration is going to interject in any way in these town by town gas bans. Are you going to let towns know that this is a poor idea and an expensive route to take?
It's a good question. I don't think there are any plans, sort of independent plans for the administration to to send that message or interject beyond sort of the pieces of the administration that are already involved, which the Brookline ban, I believe, is in front of the Attorney General. And so she has asked the DPU and the BBRS for their sort of legal opinion on two pieces of that ban question. And so those, I believe BBRS and DPU have both given that advice, or, and I believe the DPU stated that it thought these bans were precluded or preempted by Chapter 164, the main utility, it's really the Restructuring Act, but it is where all the gas and electric utility rules are. And the BBRS, a bit of a surprise, I believe they said that they saw no sort of conflict with the building code. So there were two arguments raised by the utilities against Brookline, and one was that it was precluded by the building code, which is a state-controlled code, and one is that it was precluded by the DPU regulation. And so I believe BBRS and DPU gave those answers.
That's totally accurate. Yep.
Okay, good. Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad I should know that, but
don't worry, I got your back.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think that one of the conversations I know that we've had with the utilities is sort of figuring out what's next. So I think there's a lot of pressure from certain towns, the Brooklines, the Newtons and Somervilles and Cambridge and Boston, to start building buildings that they think are compliant, are sort of fully compliant. And that comes also, we'll have, I think, similar analysis, and it's really just running the numbers that if you're building a 50-year asset or a 100-year asset today, and you can build it to sort of not have to be retrofit, that is a cheaper overall cost than having to retrofit it. The cheapest time to make these improvements is today. When it's built, I should say, is when it's built, not today, but only for new. One thing I think we are seeing, though, is that the most important piece of that probably is the envelope efficiency, the how tight the structure is, which really involves things like what windows are installed, the thickness of your walls, sort of the things that it's a lot harder to re-engineer than, as I say casually, but just putting a new box in your basement. If you have forced air and you have a gas furnace, it's relatively easy to, if you have the ducting, to at some point change that out to an air source heat pump. So I think that's the dynamic we're seeing, is that it looks like it would make more sense for the building code to start, and this is probably in the next 5 to 10 years, being at a level that won't require future retrofit. And I guess one of the interesting things is sort of who bears that cost. So most homeowners, I think, are hoping and expecting that the state will help them afford these new things, battery electric cars or air source heat pumps. And that means we're all paying for it. And so what we're really looking for is, I think, is sort of a total least cost pathway for us all. And if that means that at the initial capital investment, you pay 5% more to build the structure, and then it's sort of good to go, that may end up being the sort of least cost scenario. So I think that's where it is. There's no plan to ban it, but I think the other thing is, if you have a very high efficiency envelope, I think the architects are less likely to put a large heater in. Of course, it goes by square footage, but one of the reasons our heating units are sized right now to deal with relatively leaky envelopes. So they have to keep pumping the air in. The tighter the envelope becomes, the easier it is to heat with something that is not a big gas furnace. Now, that could be a wood pellet stove. It could be an air source heat pump. Either way, it's a smaller unit. And so I think that's probably the trend that we would end up seeing.
How did these I'm sorry, I'm getting questions in the corner. So
Oh, yeah.
one follow-up really quickly to the going back to the gas bans and the Attorney General is that did happen with the Board of Building and Regulations and Standards. They didn't pass that, and the DPU, right, Department of Public,
Yep, DPU.
wrote a very aggressive letter saying that it's a bad idea, basically in a nutshell. But we have the distinct impression that in all of the information we have in the articles that we're reading, it implied that the Attorney General is actually supportive of the Brookline ban and is asking for a study to figure out how to get there. Is that incorrect? Do we?
I'm not 100% sure. The Attorney General recently filed a petition with DPU to study this transition. Basically, that's maybe the fairest way to say it. Is they haven't seen our results yet, or our report, but they've seen similar analysis, I think, and they have hypothesized that if we're going to be in bulk moving away from home, down the street delivered methane, how are we going to do that? How are we going to address the shifting cost burden as people transition to air source heat pumps, whether it's one by one, whether it's street by street? There's different ways it could happen. But as fewer and fewer people are using that installed resource, there's fewer and fewer people to carry the cost of that repayment. And there's different ways to do it. You can sort of do accelerated repayment to the utilities. They could choose to try and close the system down geographically. I mean, these are all just ideas that are out there. And I think the Attorney General said, we see this looming problem. I think they're early in calling it a problem. I think we're just, we're going to be burning a lot of gas for a lot of years. So all of these curves that I showed before, those are sales curves, but the decline, there's a decline in gas, but it never goes away. And it never doesn't have to go away fully to make our emissions targets, but it's in fairly steady decline for the next 30 years. But that also means that's a lot of years where the system is still being used by a lot of people. So that's a long way, sorry, to say that the Attorney General has asked for that investigation. I really don't know where she stands on the ban. My guess is that, total guess is that they don't think a city by city ban is the best way to go either. And this petition sort of alludes to that, because a city by city ban starts to make it patchy, and we're not really applying sort of a system level solution where we can spread costs as much as possible, as much as is fair. But that's generally how we afford all these expensive systems is, offshore wind, and even our current gas plants are, we spend about $5 billion a year in New England on energy, basically on our electric system. And it's a shocking number that it's all of our bills aggregated among 6 states. It's a lot of money. So we spend a lot all the time. But the way it's affordable is by spreading it region-wide. So my guess is the Attorney General doesn't think that those city bans are the way to go. But I do think that the utilities are fighting a bit of a headwind by simply opposing the bans. And I don't know how to square that circle, but the bans may not be the right issue, but the issue, I think, of what to do is here to stay. And so if they and we can get out in front of it and show people that we're addressing it in a fair way, then that's probably the best way for it to go.
So I'm going to thank you. And I don't mean to discount your answers. I appreciate them. I'm getting hammered with questions, which
no, go for it. I see some popping up in the chat. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm gonna ask one here that, because you kind of alluded to this in your last answer, is how to deal with the resiliency of the electric grid. The economics on your slide imply that all the electricity is from renewables, but currently 67% of electricity is from natural gas in Massachusetts.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and I apologize. We have some good slides on that. We are seeing the things that are really increasing the resiliency of the system in the future, in a clean future, is more transmission. So greater connectivity with our neighbors to the north and to the west. And we already share an incredible amount of power with New Brunswick and Quebec and with New York, sort of more than I think most people really understand. Not trying to, say I'm smarter than anybody. It's just until you see the numbers, it's sort of, it's a huge percentage of often our daily power is coming from our neighbors. So doing more of that helps. Having a portfolio of onshore wind, offshore wind, solar. So not having all your eggs in one basket is a huge piece. And then we're also seeing, I mean, one of our other sort of controversial early findings is that when you run the weather patterns, when it's blowing, offshore wind is incredibly strong and present. But there are some days when it's just not there. So it's usually, not that it's too light of a wind, but there's just some days it's not there. Our analysis is suggesting that the best way to deal with that is to keep all our gas-fired generators that we currently have, and they essentially become peaking plants, much like many of them are now, where they turn on just in the afternoon of the hottest summer days. So 8% of the hours of a year they'll turn on, and the rest of the time they're turned off. Now it's less, it's maybe 5% of the hours of the year, and they would probably have to burn a methane blended product a hydrogen blend to have low enough emissions. But actually keeping those gas plants around and running them from time to time is one of the ways to make the system reliable. But and I know most outages, unfortunately, are on the distribution side, so that's something we're going to have to continue to think about. It's some crazy number of outages across the U.S. are from tree branches and squirrels.
Yeah,
right? They're not because we don't have enough power.
This has to be, these lines have to be buried around here for this to work. I have another question here. Heat pumps are not 300% efficient in lower temperatures. In lower temperatures, they become much less efficient when they're below freezing. They require electrical resistance heat to prevent them from icing. Can you address that a little bit?
Yeah, and that's all sort of in our modeling. Not it's a pretty complete model, but the number of sort of hours and days below zero is relatively small. So 8,760 hours a year. I don't know how many hours are in that zone of where that's the case. I mean, off the top of my head. But that's absolutely true. They aren't, the 300% efficiency is in the mid-range, which is over most of the hours of the year for heating and cooling. And electric resistance backup is available and makes a lot of sense. And honestly, so would your own propane tank or a gas line remaining connected as a gas customer. And then it really just becomes a cost question whether someone wants to be a gas customer every month of the year for those few hours when they want that sort of backup service. But that is true.
Okay, so you were talking about methane and hydrogen. Renewable natural gas has the potential to meet the demands of all residential gas demands by 2040. Is there a place for renewable gas as a transition fuel in Massachusetts' future?
Yeah, and is that the American Gas Association report?
No, that's from, I can tell you his name. That's from the gentleman, the director of gas utility of the future, the director of gas utility of the future at National Grid, Don.
Okay.
I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Yeah, Chabanpour. Yeah, no, and that's something. I mean, I know National Grid, like I said, Grid and Eversource are both bullish on the potential there, and that's really what that first slide spoke to. Is it is absolutely possible to synthesize these fuels and put them in the pipeline. And the question is, what is the cost? And is that the least cost way to heat a home? You know, our analysis is based on Federal Department of Energy. It's called the Billion Ton Report. It's been updated 2 or 3 times in the last decade. And it estimates the amount of biomass in the US that could be dedicated to fuel production without impinging on food production. So that's one of those sort of crazy interactions, right? You could plant a ton more ethanol corn, but we want to feed everybody too. So there's that balance, and they've run the numbers on that. And then our sort of population share, even as a region, of those fuels is less than we burn. You know, it isn't 3 to 5 BCF a day that our pipelines are bringing now. So it's something less than the current use. And again, it just comes down to cost. If it's a scarce resource, is that the way that most people are going to want to heat their home?
I have a couple of other questions. So sorry. There's one from Greg. Greg, you sent this to me earlier. I'm wondering if you want me to ask the question or if you want to ask the question. And so while you answer me.
No, I'm happy to. I was just curious whether some of these regulations are specific to wood leisure fires and recreational fires for the home, the fireplace or fire pit, or whether that's compared to people who heat their homes either with a wood stove or a fireplace. Just curious about what that's going to apply to. Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a great question. I do not think we have leisure wood fire emissions in our models at all. I don't think it's emissions that we track, that we would be able to track. And I think the level is so small that it wouldn't affect our overall targets. I mean, this is really, we're talking about, we're at 70.8 million metric tons of CO2 a year right now and getting down somewhere close to between 10 and 14 million metric tons. And it takes a lot of wood fires to get 1 million metric tons of emissions. So it's really looking at the large sources of how we make electricity, what the vast majority of cars are powered by, and again, the vast majority of homes are heated with. So I don't think we would ever be in a position or need to affect any of the leisure wood fire use, including my guesses for propane, gas grills. But I can ask my team about that. I don't think, I've never heard it mentioned. I don't think it sort of rises above the static, if you will. And then the home heating with wood, that is I think, a component that will remain viable for people, particularly in maybe more rural areas. The one connection, though, will be with the sort of forest management practices and the value of maintaining forest for carbon sequestration. So now our target is net zero. We can reduce our active emissions down to that, say, 10 metric ton level. But then that means we have to pull 10 metric tons out of the atmosphere. And right now it looks like our forest can get us a long way there, 5-6 metric tons a year. But that probably, we just have to be sensitive to that intersection. But our forests have always been commercial. We have a forest products industry, and part of that has always been for home heating. So the administration understands that, and I see no inkling to sort of kill the forest industry or the forest products industry. It's more of a balance between harvest times and forest management plans, and how and when you pull the wood out, versus
Yes.
How the forests are continuing to grow. So a balance.
So we'll do one more question. And Wayne, did you have a question? Wayne's muted. Wayne never knows how to unmute. Can you do that for him, Ben?
Yeah, I just did.
There we go. Perfect.
How's that? Unmuted?
No, you're good.
Okay, good. Hi, David. Thanks for having us today, and thanks for coming and helping share everything. My name is Wayne Streitzman. I'm from Best Fire Hearth and Patio. I happen to be located in New York, but I'm on the Albany market, just on the border. We do a lot of work in Mass as well. So
Okay.
we're a retailer of high-efficiency gas and biomass products and heaters, and been doing this since 1977. So I got a couple months under my belt here. We have 35 employees over here that depend on a paycheck every week to feed their families. And I guess I'm going to ask you to maybe reverse the role here for a minute and put yourself in my position. And if you were in my position, as the owner of Best Fire, now this business, what would you say to your employees regarding the viability and future of their jobs based on the current direction of your energy plan you just presented to us going forward?
You know, I think it. Well, the
Sorry
main thing
for the hard question. I'm sorry.
No, the main thing that comes to mind is that this isn't an instant transition. So I think one of the things that's potentially scary about this whole decarbonization transition is that it's easy to roll to sort of the end state, and it looks so different from today that it almost looks impossible, or it looks like it's a light switch, right? It looks like it's going to just be like things are going to get banned and that's it. But it's really a 30-year transition. So I hope for your sake you might be retired by that time.
I already am, but my employees aren't. So.
I may be as well. So that there's time. So I think that's one important thing. There's time to adapt a business. There's time to depreciate capital assets if we're talking about the utilities. There's time to diversify. I don't know how desirable that is for anybody on this call. I'm mentioning it because some of the, I talked to a group of home heating oil distributors who are advocating for a requirement for biofuel. So, they actually were asking the state to impose a biofuel requirement, a blending requirement, B50 by 2030 or something. If I think that's what they were asking for. And I was curious, and a number of them are already selling air source heat pumps as well. So they're selling a number, they're more that model of a home heating provider that can provide across a range of services. So, I think that those are the kind of things I would talk to my employees about. At the same time, I think sort of everybody digging into their own business plan is probably in order as well. And I don't mean to be patronizing. I know people are doing that. I've never run a business. I'm thinking about a conversation I had with the Department of Transportation folks who buy buses, and they're understandably concerned that the electric bus technology isn't where they would sort of hope it is yet. But it really, you can start to unpack the problem by, for them, looking at their bus replacement cycles, which are every 14 years, and sort of roll those back from 2050. And in a way, then it looks less scary. Like you have a plan, you're doing a little each year. And yeah, by the end of who's starting now, the end of their 30-year career, it will look very different, but it'll be a gradual change, over the next 30 years.
Can I have a little follow-up?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Part? So in New York, we also, with the NYSERDA program, where we kind of do a carrot to have us move in the direction that we want people to move the herd in that direction. NYSERDA incorporates pellet stove or pellet biomass products as part of the solution over here, and actually incentivize the use of pellet biomass. And the reason pellet is usually is a byproduct of a waste wood product or a part of the process. And I'm just wondering whether in your plan, you also either think about wood, biomass wood pellets as part of the solution, and whether you ever planned, well, you do incentivize now, I think, already.
Yeah. So I was going to say, we already, through our the APS, the Alternative Portfolio Standard, incentivize wood heat or wood pellet heat. So I think that is part of the plan. It'll stay part of the plan. One of the big questions I think will be what technologies get the money when, and I don't know that answer, and I'm not saying it will come away from wood stoves. I think in the APS conversation right now, we're looking at the big boys, if you will, the big combined heat and power systems, which have been incentivized for the last 15 years through the APS. And I think our market folks are thinking that they are more or less at market parity, and they can, sort of make money and survive without the added benefit of the state incentive. So these things shift, is all I'm saying, from time to time. But really, the main question, I think, or the future of the wood pellet industry is interlinked with forest management. But I fully expect that will continue. It's a great solution for some homeowners, and it's a substantial number. It's relatively small, say, compared to the large number of more urban, suburban gas users. So I think you'll see a lot of attention focused on the gas furnace question and that huge, costly distribution system, with the other things all staying in the mix. The other things like wood pellets and I mean, there's great stuff with anaerobic digesters, and I think some universities and hospital campuses, they have a system that you can sort of put a clean green furnace in, and the rest of the system stays the same, and that's a good local solution in a lot of places.
Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary. I know it's just at 4 o'clock now. I want to be respectful of your time. If it's all right, I think Karen had one sort of closing question and sort of thought that maybe might carry over into a future discussion, or if you have a minute to sort of give a partial answer now, that would be great.
Sure, yeah, I'll try.
First of all, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. We all do. As you are developing this roadmap for 2050, how can small businesses in the community become part of the process for a better solution?
Yeah, we are, I can send, maybe I can send to Ben the sort of the website that we have for the entire effort, which is where notices go. And we are talking right now about potentially sort of extending. We were going to have the roadmap is really a technical analysis on the, these sort of nerdy graphs that show transitions and sales and stock turnover. And then there's a separate policy document called the Clean Energy and Climate Plan for 2030, which is really the, where the rubber meets the road for the next 10 years. Because again, it's a long transition, so we can vision out to 2050, but no one on my team thinks that we're exactly predicting the cost. And, I'm sure we have not described the actual future in 2050. It may look like sort of like one of those, but I'm sure we don't have it exactly right. We're considering potentially delaying that policy document was going to be finalized in December, but with COVID and everything that's been going on lately, we're considering publishing a draft of that in December, which would open up space for more public comment on the draft that we sort of haven't been able to do. And I'll say we have had public involvement mainly through a group called the Implementation Advisory Committee, which is a group of appointed public members, presidents, executive directors of various nonprofits and companies. It's required by statute. It's been around since 2008 when the Global Warming Solutions Act started. So we've had a lot of back and forth sort of with the public through a smaller group, but we do want to ideally open up the conversation. The other thing I'll say is none of these documents are going to sort of publish any regulation or program in and of themselves. So the policy document, if you search for online for the 2010 or 2015 Clean Energy and Climate Plan, you'll see the kind of document that we're making, which is, for example, in 2010, one of the to-dos for the 2010s was to bring in more hydro from Canada. And you may know that it's taken a long time to get there. It's still under, it took an act of the legislature to authorize it, and it still hasn't been built. So the directionality in the document is really, it's a series of policy recommendations and policy directions, only to say that there's more to happen. So this whole issue of what happens with the gas system is one that we will not have solved by December. It's more that we will have raised the issue with a lot of new numbers to help drive the conversation forward. Whereas now we can talk about it conceptually, we'll by December be able to talk to it with sort of volume numbers per year, cost numbers, to enable the public discussion that will be at DPU on how this really happens. And it'll be a series of public discussions in the next couple of years on the sort of exact details.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks very much for your time, Mr. Undersecretary, on behalf of the whole organization, and appreciate, per Karen's last question and your answer, that you continue to keep these folks in mind as various
Absolutely.
aspects of the roadmap and the policy are formulated. We'll continue to pay attention as well, and hopefully we can pick up this discussion, with some regularity in going into the future.
Sure. Yeah, and I should say we can do this again as well. So I think we sort of have
we'll definitely try to have you back. We have a lot of there were too many questions to ask.
Okay. Yeah. No. I know this stuff, and it's the nature of this. It raises maybe more questions than it answers. It just shifts the questions from over here to hopefully fewer and over here, but it doesn't answer them all. So.
But thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.